The most dangerous stories don't begin with proof. They begin with a whisper. What if the rumor everyone laughed off for years was never meant to be public? What if it wasn't internet gossip or tabloid fantasy or jealous speculation? What if it was a file? A real one? And what if someone inside the royal family finally acknowledged that it exists? Because that is the claim shaking royal watchers right now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. 5 minutes ago, according to multiple explosive online narratives, Prince Harry took what insiders are calling a drastic, irreversible step. Not a press release, not a statement, not a carefully worded denial through friends. An action, quiet, personal, final. And the reason, according to these same claims, traces back to something far darker than a family argument or a bruised ego. A so-called Saudi dossier. You've heard the phrase before, maybe in passing, maybe buried in comment sections, maybe dismissed instantly because it sounded too extreme, too dangerous, too unbelievable to be real. But here's the question no one can seem to avoid anymore. Why won't it go away? For years, the narrative around Prince Harry and Meghan Markle has been simple, at least on the surface. A modern love story colliding with an ancient institution. A couple fleeing tradition, tabloid cruelty, and royal rigidity in search of freedom. California sunshine, independence, control of their own story. But beneath that clean headline has always been something else. Tension, contradictions, gaps in the timeline, moments that didn't quite add up, even to supporters. And when stories don't add up, people start asking questions. At first, those questions were easy to dismiss. They came from fringe corners of the internet. Anonymous posts, obscure blogs, rumors without names attached, accusations without documents. The kind of noise serious people are trained to ignore. But then something strange happened. The rumors didn't fade. They evolved. They became more specific, more detailed, more coordinated. And now, according to the latest wave of claims, they've reached a point that even the royal family could no longer quietly wave away. At the center of this storm is an alleged dossier said to contain sensitive information related to Meghan Markle's pre-royal years, international connections, and interactions with powerful figures. Allegations only. Unproven. Deeply contested. But here's where things take a sharp turn. This time, the claim isn't that bloggers found it, or that trolls invented it, or that tabloids exaggerated it. This time, the claim is that a senior royal acknowledged its existence. Princess Anne, not a woman known for gossip, not a figure associated with leaks or theatrics, not someone who benefits from chaos, which raises an uncomfortable question. Why would her name be attached to this at all? According to the circulating narrative, Princess Anne did not comment on the contents of the dossier. She did not validate allegations. She did not confirm conclusions. What she allegedly confirmed was something far more destabilizing, that a dossier exists. If true, that single detail changes everything. Because a dossier is not rumor. It's not opinion. It's not speculation. A dossier is compiled, sourced, reviewed, and the existence of one implies concern serious enough to warrant documentation. Now pause here. Take a breath. Ask yourself this honestly. If someone you trusted, someone with a reputation for blunt honesty and discretion, acknowledged that such a file existed, would you still dismiss the entire story as nonsense? Or would doubt creep in? That doubt, according to insiders, is exactly what began unraveling Prince Harry from the inside out. For years, Harry has stood firmly in Meghan's corner. Publicly, passionately, sometimes defiantly. He framed criticism as cruelty, questions as racism, skepticism as persecution. And to many, that defense made sense. Husbands protect their wives, especially when the world seems hostile. But defending someone publicly is one thing. Hearing something privately is another. Because behind palace walls, away from cameras and microphones, the rules are different. Conversations are quieter. Evidence is weighed. Risks are calculated. And when Harry allegedly learned that the dossier wasn't internet fiction but something discussed at senior levels, something shifted. Imagine that moment. Imagine believing, with absolute certainty, that every accusation was malicious nonsense, only to be told that the institution you were born into had taken those accusations seriously enough to document them. What would you feel first? Anger? Betrayal? Fear? Or something worse? Uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison to trust. This is where the story stops being about headlines and starts becoming deeply human. Because if you're Harry in that moment, you're not thinking like a prince. You're thinking like a husband, a father, a man who burned bridges for love. You're asking yourself questions you never wanted to ask. What if I didn't know everything? What if there were parts of her life I never fully understood? What if the people I accused of lying weren't? Those questions don't come with easy answers, and they don't disappear once asked. According to the narrative circulating now, this internal conflict reached a breaking point very recently. Not years ago, not during the initial royal exit, not during interviews or book tours. Now, and the timing matters, because the resurfacing of the Saudi dossier story coincides with renewed scrutiny around international influence, financial transparency, and elite access. The global climate has shifted. The tolerance for ambiguity has shrunk. Stories once dismissed as implausible are being re-examined under harsher light. And suddenly, the idea that something was quietly investigated years ago doesn't sound so crazy anymore. Here's where the story grows darker. Alongside the dossier claims are allegations involving money, influence, access, words that immediately raise red flags even when no proof is presented. Saudi, yachts, payments. These are not accusations we will present as fact. They are allegations circulating online, heavily disputed, fiercely denied, and legally sensitive. But in the court of public opinion, mere association can be enough to detonate reputations. And that's what makes this situation so volatile. Because even if nothing is proven, even if no document is ever released, the existence of suspicion alone can fracture a marriage, especially one already under relentless pressure. Which brings us to the most shocking claim of all. That Prince Harry is divorcing Meghan Markle. Not separated. Not taking space. Divorcing. Again, this is an allegation. There is no public filing. No official announcement. No confirmation. But here's what makes the claim compelling to so many people. It's being framed not as an emotional breakdown, but as a strategic response. A drastic action. If Harry believes that continued association exposes him and his children to long-term risk, legal or reputational, then distancing himself may not feel like betrayal. It may feel like survival. And that idea alone has sent shockwaves through both supporters and critics. Supporters ask, how could he abandon her after everything they endured together? Critics ask, did he finally see something he couldn't ignore? And everyone else is left staring at the same unanswered question. What exactly did Harry learn? Because people don't make drastic moves without triggers. And this trigger, according to insiders, wasn't a headline. It wasn't a tweet. It wasn't another tabloid attack. It was something said quietly, by someone credible, behind closed doors. And once said, it couldn't be unheard. As of now, the palace remains silent. There is no denial, no confirmation, no clarification, which only adds fuel to the fire. Silence, in royal terms, is never accidental. Sometimes it means nothing. Sometimes it means everything. And in this case, silence has allowed speculation to run wild, filling the void with theories, timelines, and connections that grow more elaborate by the hour. But here's the most unsettling part. If the dossier exists and is never released, if the allegations remain forever unproven yet never fully denied, then the damage may already be done. Because history shows us something uncomfortable. You don't need proof to destroy trust. You only need doubt. And doubt, once planted, spreads quietly. Which brings us back to the beginning. 5 minutes ago, Prince Harry allegedly took a step he can't undo. Not because the world demanded it, but because something behind the scenes forced his hand. And now, the question is no longer whether the Saudi dossier is real. Because if this story continues unfolding the way insiders suggest, the next revelation won't come from the internet. It will come from someone who was never supposed to speak. And when that happens, nothing about this saga will ever look the same again. Some rumors don't disappear. They don't die. They don't fade. They don't get buried by denials or drowned out by official statements. They wait. They sit quietly at the edges of public consciousness, dismissed as nonsense, laughed off as conspiracy, tolerated only because they seem too outrageous to be real. And then, years later, when the timing is right, they return. Louder, sharper, more specific. This is one of those rumors. For nearly a decade, Whispers have circulated about Meghan Markle's life before Prince Harry. Not about her acting career, not about her blog, not about her divorce. Those stories were public, documented, and relatively uncontroversial. This was something else. A different category of rumor altogether. At first, it appeared in obscure corners of the internet. Anonymous forums. Comment sections where usernames changed daily. Vague posts with no evidence, no names, no structure. Just implications. People would write things like, look deeper, or connections matter, or follow the access. They'd hint at wealthy circles, powerful men, luxury environments that existed far outside Hollywood casting rooms. And every time, the same response followed. This is ridiculous. This is misogynistic. This is racist. This is fiction. And for a long time, that response worked. Because here's an uncomfortable truth. When a woman marries into power, especially as an outsider, scrutiny multiplies. And history is filled with examples of women being unfairly maligned simply for rising too high, too fast. So defenders dismissed the whispers without hesitation. And rightly so at first. But something strange happened as the years went on. The rumors didn't expand wildly. They narrowed. Instead of growing more chaotic, they became oddly consistent. The same phrases began appearing across unrelated platforms. The same timelines referenced. The same geographic markers. The same social environments. That's when some observers started to feel uneasy. Because true internet nonsense usually mutates endlessly. It contradicts itself. It spirals. It collapses under its own absurdity. This didn't. It stayed focused. And focused rumors are harder to ignore. Still, mainstream media wouldn't touch it. And that wasn't surprising. The legal risk alone would have been catastrophic. Without documents, without named sources, without official confirmation, no editor would sign off on it. So the whispers stayed underground. Until Prince Harry entered the picture. Once Meghan Markle became engaged to a senior royal, everything changed. Her past, once irrelevant, suddenly mattered in ways it never had before. Royal vetting is not a myth. It's not a tabloid invention. It's a documented process. Anyone entering the royal family is scrutinized extensively. Financial history, personal relationships, associations, public records. The higher the stakes, the deeper the scrutiny. So when online commentators noticed that certain rumors predated the engagement, predated the publicity, predated even the global fascination, they began asking a new question. If these whispers existed before the crown, who started them? And why? Some claimed jealousy. Others suggested industry resentment. A few pointed to online trolls with agendas. All plausible. But then came the first shift. A former acquaintance, speaking vaguely and carefully, hinted in an interview that Meghan's social circle had once extended far beyond what was publicly known. No accusations. No names. Just a suggestion that her world had been larger, wealthier, more international than people assumed. The comment barely made a ripple. But for those already paying attention, it felt like confirmation of something unspoken. Then came another moment. A resurfaced photograph. Perfectly ordinary on its own. A yacht. Smiling faces. Sunlight. Luxury. The image wasn't illegal. It wasn't scandalous. It wasn't even unique in celebrity culture. But context is everything. People began connecting dots that may or may not have been real. They asked why that environment appeared repeatedly in whispered narratives. Why certain wealthy figures were always nearby. Why the same region kept coming up in stories told years apart by people who had no obvious connection to each other. Again, defenders pushed back. Hard. Plenty of aspiring actors attend high-end events. Networking happens everywhere. Photos don't equal wrongdoing. All true. But here's the problem with whispers that won't die. They don't need to be proven to feel unsettling. They just need to linger. And linger they did. When Meghan and Harry stepped back from royal duties, critics assumed the rumors would finally fade. Without the royal spotlight, without institutional relevance, what incentive was there to keep digging? But instead, the opposite happened. As Harry began publicly criticizing the institution, accusing it of cruelty, negligence, and silence, some began wondering whether the silence went both ways. What if the palace wasn't just protecting itself? What if it was protecting him? That question quietly shifted the tone of speculation. Because if there were sensitive matters that could harm not just Meghan but Harry by association, discretion would make sense. Silence would make sense. Containment would make sense. And suddenly, the lack of public rebuttal didn't look like indifference. It looked like management. Then came the word that changed everything. Dossier. Not rumor. Not gossip. Dossier. That word began appearing in posts, always cautiously, always framed as allegation. People claimed that concerns raised during vetting had been formally documented, that information from multiple sources had been compiled, that the file wasn't explosive enough to act on publicly, but serious enough to archive. Once again, this could have been dismissed as fantasy. Except for one thing. The word dossier is not a word internet trolls usually choose. It's clinical, bureaucratic, institutional. It implies process. And that's what made some royal watchers uncomfortable. Because royal households document everything. Every concern. Every rumor deemed potentially destabilizing. Every risk, no matter how remote. Not to punish, but to prepare. So the idea that a dossier existed didn't necessarily mean guilt. But it did mean concern. And concern, once acknowledged, has consequences. Still, this remained fringe discussion. Until, according to recent claims, it didn't. According to the narrative now circulating, Princess Anne's name entered the conversation quietly, almost accidentally. Not through a public speech. Not through a leaked memo. Through an alleged offhand confirmation in a private context that the file was real. No details. No conclusions. Just acknowledgement. If that claim is false, it will likely never be officially corrected. Royals don't deny rumors individually. They let them burn out. But if it's true, the implications are enormous. Because Princess Anne is not someone who entertains fantasy. She is known for pragmatism, discipline, and blunt realism. So if she acknowledged the existence of a dossier, it suggests that at minimum, something was taken seriously enough to record. Now imagine how that information travels. Not as a headline, not as gossip, but as a quiet word passed to someone who deserves to know. Prince Harry. This is where the whisper becomes personal. Harry is not a passive observer in this story. He's not a commentator. He's not a distant royal watching events unfold. He is the man whose life, reputation, and children are directly tied to the woman at the center of these allegations. And that changes the stakes completely.